join me in welcoming Krista Tippett.
Thank you. You're all so beautiful. Thank you for being here so early in the morning.
Krista, I will start by reading you something by Rumi, The Book of Love, because I feel like this is a great place to start and anchor our conversation. I hear nothing in my ear but your voice. Heart has plundered mind of its eloquence. Love writes a transparent calligraphy, so on the empty page my soul can read and recollect. I feel that for a lot of us, On Being is a destination of grounding ourselves and getting back to who we really are in a world that can be tiring and hard and fast-paced, especially for our group of wonderful humans here that work crazy hours up. And I was wondering, what is your place of recollection and home?
You know, I'm right now, just to give you an honest answer, at a place in my life where I'm realizing that I have to recreate that I've worked so hard for so long. And I took this, On Being used to be embedded in a large media organization, American Public Media, and then 3 years ago we took it independent, so it's an independent nonprofit, which has been so exciting and so joyful. But it also meant that I became the organizational leader, as well as the host and the executive producer. And so, and then I finished the book this year, and that was all really hard. And I've actually realized that like sometimes when people talk to me about how nourishing the show is for them, I wish I could listen to it myself. Because, you know, for me, I mean, if I happen to be driving along and it comes on the radio, you know, I will immediately turn it off as quickly as possible. The last thing I want to do is hear my own voice. So I don't, you know, my answer is that I'm seeking that as well right now.
We're on the right path. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because people romanticize and imagine that because I spend my life, because these wonderful conversations are part of my life, that's how I spend my life. But I would say every job is a job, and so even, you know, that is the part of my work that feeds me. But it's surrounded by admin and raising money, and you know, that's true of. I feel like we often, there's this kind of trope now that we should all seek meaningful work, and that's important, but it's not going to be possible for everyone for the job they do to be in and of itself meaningful. And I'm very big on the notion of vocation, and also opening up vocation to be, you know, how you do whatever you are, and how you are in all the spaces you inhabit, not just your working life. And that being vocation, being our calling as human beings. And, you know, to your point, I think we long to be called to our best selves, but so much of the messaging that we get culturally is not doing that. It's just demoralizing us. But that's not just a calling for a job title. It's how you are as a friend and as a neighbor and as a citizen and a coworker.
We talk a lot about momentum here at Creative Mornings with our speakers. Do you feel that you're at a point of momentum? And when is the first time you felt that feeling of something is happening?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do you mean momentum as something that's ongoing, or these cathartic, these moments?
I feel a feeling of velocity when you feel that you are onto something big.
I would say that I tragically right now feel like what I have been passionate about bringing into the world, or nourishing in the world, which is flexing our muscle of caring for each other as much as our muscle has been trained to be right and to win. seeking voices of wisdom, seeking wisdom as opposed to mere knowledge, seeking discernment as opposed to opinion, has become such urgent work for our common life. Such a contrast to our political life, both with here and in the U.S. The topic of today is love. And something that's very important to me is that we start to use that language of love in public life as something muscular and robust. And we have to fill the word itself with new meaning, and we have to embody it as a practice and not a feeling. And in terms of momentum, I feel like we're at this bizarre moment where, to even speak this way about love not long ago would have seemed nonsensical. But there's this opening that's been created because we have begun to name hate. We have absolutely we've seen it as something powerful in public life. In the U.S., we've created a new legal category of hate crimes. And I think that this has paradoxically created an opening for us to insist on hatred's opposite, which is love. And we have to do that as convincingly, though, as hatred has expressed itself. So it's a momentum I would not have wished for, but here it is.
Love has a big place in your new book. It has a whole chapter dedicated to it. And I love in your conversation with Pico when you say that it's something robust and muscular and not necessarily something romantic.
Right. Well, and so if I say that I want us to become fluent, not just in the language of love, but the practice of love, part of what that means is that we have to reckon with how we've watered down or just been very narrow in the way we talk about love and sing about love and make films about love. Culturally, we've really just honored kind of a sliver of love's potential, which is the eros, right? But and I think in English we have a really limited. We only have this one word for it, and given that and given how watered down it is, it's an amazingly powerful word. But in other languages, in Greek, there's eros, and then there's agape, which is just practical love that can be expressed to a stranger as much as to someone you know and care about. It has nothing to do with how you feel about someone or even whether you are familiar with them. And there's philia, the love of friendship. And in Pali, the one of the root Buddhist languages, there's metta, loving kindness. And that is a compassionate attention to others far away, and it begins with a compassionate attention to yourself. So there's some intelligence about the many forms of love. One thing I ended up having to put myself through the paces when I wrote the love chapter. It felt so presumptuous, because love crosses the distances between us, and it also brings them into relief like nothing else. And when I was trying to write about love in this, it felt abstract until I felt like I could put on the line like my own messy experience of love. And we all have a messy experience of love. But what I want to say about that is that is also the source of our sophisticated knowledge about how complicated this actually is, and thus how to enact it in a meaningful way, beyond our circles of romance and family and tribe.
I love when you say that at the end we'll be measured not by what we accomplish, but on how we love. So it's really powerful, especially for right now, where love is necessary.
Yes.
I have a question about malleability, and I feel in a way that we're the most malleable generation because there's a lot of love and dedication towards a career we love and a place to call home, but we're constantly brought back to the start, and we're constantly at square one because it's harder to find what we're looking for. The world changes more. In terms of careers, there isn't that sense of stability and growth that previous generations might have encountered, which is exciting and amazing, but also very hard.
Yes.
What is your piece of advice for us, is my question.
So I think what I find calming and important and helpful is to pull back to a long lens and so what the way I see what you're describing, or one way I would say it also, I think you're right that this is a unique generation where so very little is a given. In so many ways, one way I see this as being very dramatic is that this is the first, we are kind of the first generation of human beings who don't inherit religious and spiritual and ethnic identity like we inherit, eye color. Whether people liked the identities they were given, whether that was comfortable or joyful, they had something, they were standing on some ground that had been handed to them. Also, I feel like we should sometimes just step back and take a breath together and think, this is the generation in which we are redefining marriage, redefining gender. I mean, that is huge. And however much you welcome it or resist it, and of course there's this, there's a spectrum of reactions that also just have to do with the way human beings react differently to change. It's an enormous thing, and we should let in the enormity of that. It's unsettling, whether you welcome it or resist it. It is destabilizing the ground beneath our feet in a way which may be wonderful, but we need to also take, there's a stress that comes. Physiologically, as creatures, we're not exactly hardwired to take in this amount of change and just feel calm and great about it. So I really think, I think part of what the advice I would give is realize that it is reasonable to feel unsettled and to feel a little, to feel like you need other people to be accompanying you. I feel like that becomes more urgent, and I like that language of accompanying each other. That it's not easy, and I honestly think what you're touching on is the human dynamic beneath so many of our big geopolitical crises right now. Because, again, physiologically, we're not made to handle this kind of existential change. We have a lot, we have to not have any, and it works for different generations also, to not have a sense of what your children's prospects are. It's very stressful for another generation, especially when you grew up thinking you knew what that would look like. And what we have right now are, and it's, right, the fact that we, in this generation, and you in particular, who are 20 years younger than me, have the ability to create your lives, to invent your identities, that is amazing. That's amazing. And stressful at the same time. People who have a certain amount of education, who even know about a community like this, who have a certain amount of human and financial and intellectual support, are going to be able to walk towards this kind of possibility of creating your lives with greater courage. Experiencing that as a wonderful possibility. on the other hand, people who feel that they are on the losing side of this equation, who have no idea, who are struggling to survive or perceive that it is only a struggle for survival for now, experience this to be crushing and threatening. And I think that human dynamic underlies the divisions that we see emerging politically. So to me, it's hugely important that we start to honor this human dimension, the root dimension, and not let ourselves be handed over to fighting, duking it out at the political level. It's a very important question. I woke up this morning to listening to Donald Trump giving his speech at the Republican convention, and the terrible thing is that, he is a person who is letting that human pain and fear be in the room. In that way, he's honoring it. He's not arguing it away, he's not trying to rationalize it, he is promising policies, but first and foremost, he is letting people be frightened and telling them that it's reasonable for them to be frightened. And we need more of that, but by people who are not trying to manipulate it and exploit it. Look, we know this in our private lives, right? We know, and collective life, political life is just a magnification of human life. We know that if we are in pain, if we're frightened, we can pretend, if we don't acknowledge it and walk with it and walk through it, it will haunt us. It will still be there, and it will come out in destructive ways, and that's what we see happening politically now.
And yet you say that our world is abundant with beauty and courage
and
grace.
Yes.
Do you feel that the way spiritual life is evolving gives us hope?
Yeah, I think and as part of this fluid picture, part of that is reclaiming spiritual life in its fullness and also in its practicality. I think of yoga and meditation and even reaching out for new forms of community, even a gathering like this, as reinventing the kind of spiritual technologies that gave these traditions have carried forward in time. I do believe that our world is abundant with goodness and beauty and grace. And that story isn't told as powerfully as the story of what is frightening and dark and dangerous. I think we also need I want us to be taking that seriously in ourselves, taking it seriously, treating it as a data point when we see it in the world around us, and shining a light on that, pointing at it, because it is just as powerful, but it's not as well publicized, and other people are not going to publicize it. We have to do that.
I think this links to the way you talk about the willingness of being surprised.
Yes.
And recognizing joy and pleasure. I think you talk a lot about pleasure, which is something that reminds me of Charles Eames when he says, "Take your pleasure seriously."
Yes.
I love that. I feel like the world needs to be reminded of that, because there's so many reminders of what is not pleasurable and not okay, and how behind your own email and everything else you're doing wrong. Yeah. And there's a need of a bigger reminder of things that make us human in the way of recognizing pleasure and words that shimmer and beautiful things that anchor us in that peaceful human space.
Yes, and I emphasize that and insist on it as somebody who for too much of my life was too cerebral. Delight is a virtue, right? It is. And to be called to our best selves should not just be serious, but it should be pleasurable, it should be joyful, it should be life-giving. And a sense of humor, an ability to smile and laugh, including at oneself, is absolutely, to me, a litmus test of a wise person. I haven't met a wise person who didn't know how to smile and laugh. And just again, in terms of how we are, I mean, we call ourselves to, there's this phrase in English, in American, eat your spinach, which I think doesn't make sense anymore because spinach has become so much more delicious, but.
Because now we have kale.
Yeah, we have kale, all right. I think part of the reason that the liberal progressive enterprise is not redeeming us is because it is so humorless. It's about doing things because it's right or reasonable or respectable, and we need to be motivated by something that is life-giving, and if it is life-giving, it will contain delight. Last December I traveled to Austria and I interviewed Brother David Stendhal-Ross. I don't know if any of you know him. He's this amazing Benedictine monk, and he's spent his whole life writing about gratitude. Now this is somebody who was a teenager in Austria when his country was occupied by Nazi Germany. So he's known the dark side of humanity, and he's known bitter social conditions. And he says to say that that you should be grateful for everything is an absurd statement. So you can't be grateful for everything, but he said in every moment you can find something to be grateful for. You can be grateful. And I think that's a good way to think about this moment we inhabit and walking into it courageously. I'm a big person. I'm big on hope as a choice, as an orientation, as a muscle that we need to exercise. But I'm not hopeful about everything. I'm actually not hopeful about politics right now. And yet, politics doesn't define us. And there is so much I am hopeful about and for that I can be hopeful about and for in every moment that is based on the reality of beauty and grace and goodness that is also abundant.
And what are you most grateful for?
What am I most grateful for? Oh,
I'd say you kids.
What?
Something else than your kids.
Well, my kids would tell you that, like, we rented an Airbnb here, and 3 days ago I moved out. They're 18 and 22, all right, I'm not in it. Because I decided that it was better for our relationship for us to have some space. And so they could sleep in, as they are doing now, and I would not be the nagging mother. I'm grateful for my kids. In every moment. I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the narrative, right? The fuller story of our time that you all are sitting here embodying. And it's not always articulated, and it's not taken as seriously, but it is every bit as serious, and it's every bit as much the story of our time that we're writing. I'm grateful for that, but I have to hang on to that knowledge as I listen to the Today program, which I do actually every morning in Minnesota, so I'm totally up on Jeremy Corbyn and all of that.
You start your book with the words, "I'm a person who listens for a living. I listen for wisdom and beauty and for voices not shouting to be heard." That emphasis on the quieter, brilliant voices. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, well, something that so many of my conversation partners have said to me across the years, both in terms of their life experience and people who've studied history, who have a long view of time, is that change always happens in the margins. And actually there's a great, something that stuck with me all these years, another Benedictine, there's something about these Benedictines, Sister Joan Chittister, who some people say if women became bishops in the Catholic Church, she would be it. It's not going to happen, she knows it, but she said to me a long time ago, and this really formed me, so she says, 6th century Rome, whatever the Times equivalent of that Rome, never carried a headline that said, Benedict writes rule. There were these little groups of 12 men and 12 communities, that's all. They never scaled it. Which no one was paying attention to, which was not successful by any measure, really. Which 1,000 years later literally keeps Western civilization alive. And I really take solace in that. That I believe that is happening now, that even with all of my resources as a journalist, I don't know what thing is happening 12 people at a time that will be our salvation 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now. But it does work that way. And one of the experiences I've had recently being out on the road with the book is and I've kind of alluded to this, but I experience that people will generalize about the state of humanity on the basis of what they're reading in the newspapers and not be taking in what they know in their own lives. So I think it could happen today that any of us in this room might generalize about the state of humanity on the basis of what's happening in that convention hall in Cleveland, not taking this gathering as seriously. And, this is what the margins look like, right? And this is where change happens. Human change makes social change possible, and this counts as much as that. And I feel like we have to keep telling ourselves this, because we are, the headlines and the voices are that much louder, and they come to us 25 times a day rather than once in the morning and once at night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.